Hello, everybody. Today I want to talk a little bit about evaluating sources before letting you look at a source to see if it is appropriate for our argument. So basically, a source is any article or book chapter or website or newspaper story or magazine article, I guess, journal or magazine article. I know I said article before, that you want to use in your arguments. So basically, a source is an outside or evidence that was gathered by someone else, or evidence that comes from outside your own work as a resource, as a researcher, and that's totally fine. Um, Sources make arguments stronger, but we need to make sure that we're using sources that are appropriate for academic arguments. So, the quality of the sources used influences the argument making use of them. As a writer of argumentative essays, you should always strive to use sources that are accurate, credible, objective, current, and comprehensive. Nothing can discredit an otherwise strong and convincing argument more than a reference to a source the audience does not find credible. So, this video will be all about evaluating sources to make sure they are accurate, credible, objective, current, and comprehensive. Now, some people use other terms to evaluate sources. There's something called the CRAP test, CRAAP, and then the CRA, and so on. Those letters all stand for a word like accurate or credible, right? So if you have seen that someplace, or if you've had another instructor or teacher that has used the CRAP method for evaluating sources, please use that if it works for you. I just don't use it. There's nothing wrong with it. I just use these words instead. It'll get at the same thing. You'll determine if your source is appropriate by using these terms, as well as using the CRAP test or any other way you want to evaluate a source. So whatever works for you, but these are the terms that I use. And what I've done is I have provided you with, in Blackboard, a graphic organizer that has space for you to write notes about whether a source is accurate or not, credible, objective, and so on, that will help guide you as you look through different sources. Now, what I want you to do this week is to look at a web source and do a discussion board post about a certain web source, but I also want you to use that graphic organizer as you're researching for this essay number 2 personally, so that you can evaluate sources, because we want to use sources that are appropriate for academic arguments. So if you feel that a source is appropriate for use in your essay, but you're afraid that maybe some readers might not see it as relevant, then you need to do some work in your essay to let your readers know, well, in fact, this source that I'm using, this article that I'm using, for example, is relevant, it is accurate, it is reliable. So you need to work to show the audience that. And as you're looking at sources, especially in the climate in America today, you need to be aware of the political, cultural, economic, and social biases of the sources you use. So we want a source to be accurate, credible, objective, current, comprehensive. Let's talk about what each of those things mean in detail. So I want a source to be accurate. And an accurate source is one that is factual and free of errors. So how do you determine whether a source is accurate? A good idea, I think, is to first go to Wikipedia and type in your topic. Because Wikipedia is an encyclopedia. It's just an encyclopedia on the web. So you are what Wikipedia does is it gives you a broad overview of a topic and a pretty comprehensive one. It's not going to always get down and give you very minute details about a certain topic, but it should describe the topic in detail and it should give you an overview. Now, Wikipedia is not appropriate to use in an academic argument because encyclopedias are not appropriate. As encyclopedias give you general information, and when we're using our arguments, or sorry, when we're writing our arguments, we want to use sources that go a little bit deeper, that will give us specialized knowledge in some cases that we can't get through looking at an encyclopedia. So don't use Wikipedia as your source in your essay, but do go to it to become familiar with your topic. Now, once you know some things based on what you have read in Wikipedia or any other encyclopedia, Wikipedia is an easy one to access, but there are other encyclopedias both in the library and online that you can look at. So I guess I shouldn't say go to only Wikipedia. Go to any encyclopedia to get a general idea about your topic. And then what you need to do is make sure that your sources go along with that general information that you know. Now, hopefully your sources will add to that information. But if you see something that is drastically different than something you have read generally about or something that you know, then you might want to consider or reconsider using that source because it may not be as accurate. So compare the information it contains to the same information in several other sources. Now, this is a good guideline, but sometimes a source will differ because of new research. That's okay. You may want that to happen. But if the author of an article has not indicated that their research is new and different than has what come before, then it may just be that they have misinterpreted something or that they're just incorrect. So watch out for that. Make sure the source is free of spelling and grammar mistakes. Nothing can discredit you with readers in general like spelling and grammar mistakes. Check to see if the author cites sources for the information discussed. Look for a wide range of sources of good quality. You might use google.com to check out sources that the author cites if needed. Just, if you're the writer of your article cites another author, you might want to just put that author's name into Google to see if that author is respected as an authority about a certain topic. And also, if you notice a well-known source dealing with a particular topic has not been consulted or discussed in a certain article or book chapter or other source you're using, that may indicate a lack of familiarity with the subject. So you may not want to use that or not. All right, let's look at credibility. A credible source is one that is believable. So to determine if a source is credible, check the writer's expertise and credentials. So usually if you're looking at a book, there will be a bio of the author. Check to see if that gives you any information that will let you know that the writer knows what they're talking about. You could also just put the writer's name into Google, do a quick Google search. If you go on to Amazon.com, Amazon.com usually has information about the author for all of the books it sells. If you're looking at a journal article, especially from a database, usually there's sort of one or two lines biography about the author of the articles so that you will know that they are credible. It usually tells, what their subject is or what their main job is. Like if they're a food writer and they've written something about a new restaurant or something, okay, well, that I probably can listen to this person because they will have experience writing about food. So check out the author. Make sure the author is an expert on the subject that they're writing about. Check to see where the source was published. You'll get to know as you read in the academic community, you'll get to know the publishers that publish the content that is the most accurate and credible. If you have a book published by a university press, it is probably peer reviewed, and for something to be peer reviewed, it means that before it's published, it's actually read and reviewed by experts in the discipline, and they confirm or recommend that it be published or not. So when something is peer reviewed, then you know that it has been looked at by people who know about that subject. So for example, if I were going to write a book about what is the best way to teach writing, I would probably have it reviewed by other teachers of writing, and if they signed off on it, or if they said, "Yeah, this is good stuff," then probably the publisher would want to go ahead and publish that. If the source is an article, determine if it is published in a scholarly journal or popular magazine. An article in a scholarly journal are almost always credible, or articles in scholarly journals are almost always credible because most journals are peer reviewed and are aimed at the academic community. You have to watch with popular magazines, however, because they're usually written for the general public. That does not mean that they're not credible. You just have to watch those. Make sure that when you're dealing with popular magazines, that that the information is presented as factual information or as information you need rather than an opinion, right? Because a lot of things in the popular magazines will be opinion pieces, so just watch out for that. If you're looking to get facts from an article, make sure that that's what the article is saying that it's giving you. Also, look for reviews of sources written by book reviewers. Consult Book Review Digest, the New York Times Book Review website, or Amazon.com for reviews. Amazon.com will usually give a couple of lines or a couple of passages from professional reviewers as well as Amazon customers. Also, if you go on to Google Books will have a lot of ebooks and a lot of print books that they have passages from that you can read. You can either read the entire book or some of the book, or they will not have any of the book there because of copyright reasons, but they will have reviews and information about the book. So check out Google Books as well. That is another good source. All right, we want to have sources that are objective. Now, an objective source is not influenced by personal opinions or feelings to the point of heavy bias. Now, we all have bias, and when you express an opinion in an argument, you bring a little bit of bias to that argument. But we want to have sources that do not have heavy bias, or sources where a person's preconceived notions about a subject colors how they write about it. We always want to, in our essays, write about things objectively. We want to let our research guide us, let our personal experiences guide us, not just what we've heard or what we've always thought about a certain topic. We don't want that to guide us so much as our research and our experiences. And when we use sources, we want to hold those sources to the same standard. So I say, although bias exists to some degree in all arguments, you should ask yourself before using a source whether a writer's assumptions are justified by facts or are the result of emotion or preconceived ideas. For example, I may think that every single person who believes in the death penalty I don't know, is a garbage person. I don't know what I might believe. And so if I start writing about people who are in favor of the death penalty and I start making claims such as we shouldn't let those people have guns in their home because they believe and celebrate murder and would just as likely kill you as look at you, that kind of thing. Well, have I researched that? Has that been shown in statistics? Or is that just coming from my preconceived notions about people who are in support of the death penalty? So watch for those. So we need to consider the political, cultural, economic, etc. views of the writer, publisher, sponsoring group, and determine if these views unfairly influence the material in the source. So, for example, a lot of people will not find information from Fox News to be credible because they feel like Fox News is heavily biased to conservative issues or conservative viewpoints. So, if you're talking to or writing to people who you think maybe have liberal leanings, then you may not want to cite Fox News because those people will not respond to Fox News. They'll dismiss that right away as coming from Fox News. Look for word choice to make sure the language is not slanted. Make sure that I'm not saying things like people who believe in the death penalty or people who think the death penalty should be used are murderers. That kind of thing is slanted language. I mean, and sometimes it's difficult to determine what is slanted language or not. It's actually not difficult to determine it, I find. It's difficult to talk about what is slanted language and what isn't in a theoretical session like, right now. But when you see it, you know when something is a little slanted, when something is a little off. And also review the writer's points to determine if the argument is one-sided. And back to the slanted language, if someone is using something like derogatory language about a certain group or racial slurs or sexist language, then that is not objective at all. So you want to not do those things in your arguments and also not use as sources arguments that use that kind of language either. Now, is a source current? Well, a current source is one that is up to date. Look for the publication date of a book on the publication information page at the front. For a magazine or journal, look for the date of publication on the cover. A lot of times when you find sources from one of the HCTC databases, it'll have all of the information about the date right there before the source on the source information page, so you'll be able to see it. Excuse me. The publication dates for sources dealing with scientific subjects can be very important. Ensure you are using the most current edition of the source you're consulting. So if there are several editions of a certain book, make sure you're using the most current edition. Some classic sources can provide good information. So there's not really a limit. Sometimes professors will put a limit on sources. So, for example, they might say, please do not use a source that is older than 2000. So things published in the year 2000 and on. Use only those sources. Well, I'm not going to do that here because there are some classic sources, depending on what your topic is, that can be used. But watch what your professor says in your other classes, and then always make sure your information is up to date. So Kersner and Mandel suggests that your topic determine how current your sources must be. So if your topic deals with science and technology, you probably should use sources that are more recent. Topics from history and the humanities do not necessarily require that you consult more recently published sources. However, you may want to not go too far back, because the way that we talk about history, the way that we talk about the humanities maybe has changed as well. So go back to looking at the outdated language. If there's language that you know is outdated, maybe choose a different source that is more recent. Also, you should use sources that your readers can easily find if they so desire. So older sources may not be as readily available as those that are more current, so keep that in mind as well. The bottom line with currency is you need to make sure the information you use in your argument is always up to date, regardless of the publication date of your source. And comprehensiveness. So a source is comprehensive if it covers its subject in depth. So according to Kersner and Mandel, how comprehensive a source needs to be depends on your purpose and audience, as well as your writing assignment. So if you want to see if a source, or if you want to check how comprehensive a source is, you can look for detailed treatment of the subject. If you have something that provides details or really gives you an in-depth study, that's good. Look for background information that helps you understand the writer's discussion, and look for references to other writings about the topic. Now, using the internet is something that I guess warrants a little bit of further discussion. So I suggest that you access the HCTC library's catalog and the databases. But, you can also use the internet. And you can use search engines like google.com or bing.com to find documents on the web. Locating sources on the internet that are appropriate for academic arguments is sometimes tricky, however, since there is so much information to be found on the web, information that is constantly being revised, removed, and added to. Also, there's no one main authority evaluating and screening most of the information found on the web. Anybody and their brother can put something on the web if they want, right? You can make free websites all the time. So not all information on the internet is reliable. And of course, the same thing could be said for articles and books. You have crazies that will write articles all the time. You have crazies that publish books. However, you are more likely to find material that is unreliable on the internet than you are in most print sources, just because of the sheer volume of information that is on the internet. Furthermore, websites often lack publication information such as dates, place of publication, or a named author that print sources do have. So when you use a web source, it will always look more credible if you find online sources. I spaced out there for a minute. It'll always be more credible and will make your argument stronger if you can find sources from the web that you know the date they were published, you know the authors, you know what institutions the author is connected to. That kind of thing on the web will make your argument stronger. I'm not saying don't use the web. I'm just saying that databases and the library catalog are better places to go, because most of the time, 95% of the time, that you can get good information from those places, and you're not so sure that you can get good information all the time from the web. So let's look at some things that we need to consider when using the internet. So some additional concerns when evaluating web sources for accuracy: any factual errors should indicate a website should not be used as a source. Consider the links to other sites and determine if these links lead to accurate information. If you have a lot of broken links, which are links that do not go anywhere or go to like an error page, one of those 404 error pages or whatever. You may not want to use that. Verify information through a print source or a website such as encyclopedia.com. That's a recommendation from Kerzner and Mandel. Credibility. A site listing authors, editors, directors, or sponsoring groups will probably be more credible than a site that does not. A site governed by a panel or agency is probably more credible than, Sally McGee has posted her thoughts up on a webpage. Sally McGee is not usually as credible as, say, the World Wildlife Federation, which is an actual group that, does work that people will be familiar with. Make sure the site is free or grammar, spelling, and mechanics errors, and that's very ironic. And I'll fix this before I put it on Blackboard. It should say make sure this site is free of grammar, so that's a typo there. I apologize. So I may not be a credible source to use. Ensure any advertising on the site. Now this is objectivity. Ensure any advertising on the site does not affect the information. So some websites will have banners that advertise things. Well, make sure that advertising does not affect the information on the site. So as Kerzner and Mandel state, the site should keep advertising separate from content. If a for-profit company, political agency, or specialist group sponsors the site, ensure the group's commercial interests or agendas do not affect the content of the site. So for example, let's say that the beef industry is sponsoring a certain website about nutrition. Well, make sure that the beef industry is truthful about the effects of eating red meat and how maybe it's not as healthy as eating chicken or pork or something like that. So, if you see that, they're obviously making claims about red meat that are not true because of other nutritional sites that you have seen or other nutritional information you've had, then you may not want to cite something, some website sponsored by the beef group, I guess. So watch out for that. Watch out and make sure that advertising does not influence the actual content of a web page or website. So you can use a website's URL to assess objectivity. Usually sites ending in .edu or .gov are designed to provide information. So EDU stands for education and GOV stands for government. So those are sites that their primary goal is to provide information. Sites that are .com sites are commercial sites. Their primary goal many times is to sell something, and .net or network sites are sites that are their primary purpose is to bring people together. So .com sites and .net sites are not as appropriate for academic arguments because they might have some agenda that influences their content. So .edu, .gov, those are the websites to use for academic arguments. You can also use organization web pages, so .org, but use those cautiously because this domain is available for profit and nonprofit organizations. Also, even if the organization is a nonprofit, it still could contain biased or inaccurate information to further a certain agenda. Okay, so watch out for that. Okay, currency. If you're looking at a website, look for the date of creation or last update. Check links to make sure they're still active. Look for dates in the information provided on the site to ensure the content is not out of date, even if the site was updated recently. Comprehensiveness. Determine whether the coverage of the topic is in depth. Determine whether you can find the information found on the site elsewhere. If the information is available in a print source or one from a database, I would go ahead and use that print or database source. Only use a website if it truly adds to your discussion of your topic. Because to be honest, no matter how we might feel about websites, people in the academic community, they will always look to the information found in journal articles, in databases, in print books to be more credible than sources from the web. So the bottom line is if you can avoid using the web, I would do it. I would use databases. I would use journal articles. I'd use book chapters. But if you find some really good information on the web, just make sure that the website that you're using is credible as well. And this is changing, and sometimes it takes the academic community a little while to catch up, because nowadays a lot of people just in our daily lives feel like we can get good information from the web. The academy, I guess, or colleges and universities are still catching up, but it's changing. I foresee a future where, the web is where we would go to get most of our information. And in fact, outside of the academy, that's where we are today, I think, in our daily lives. All right. So and this, I guess, goes back to objectivity. When using websites, avoid confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency that people have to accept information that supports their own beliefs and to ignore information that does not. Do not use a website that may not be as credible, objective, accurate, comprehensive, or current just because the information found on the site supports your view. So if you find something really great that, this researcher is saying this, that's great. That really agrees with what I'm saying. Good, I want to use this. But then as you overview the site, you realize it's not as credible. Don't use that site just because it says what you want it to say. Find what you want, find information that you want to say in other sources. Don't use something that's not credible just because it says what you want. Now, what you're going to do now is you're going to go to step 2 for this week. And in step 2, I have a list of sources found on the web. And I want you to choose one of those sources and determine if it is accurate, credible, objective, current, and comprehensive. And I want you to write a discussion board post for all of us to see that evaluates this website. Now, spend a little bit of time on this. I want this to be something that we can look at in depth. So when I look at each of your evaluations, I want to learn something about that source and to learn why it is not accurate, or why it is or is not credible, or why it is or is not objective, and so on. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. I hope that you found this presentation to be helpful. And good luck with the assignment this week.